So that's all. I would say they are the kind of tests of the majority or the mediocrity or the larger system. But unless the person is allowed to perform, how can we test anyway? These are all side understandings which you have to develop when you interpret something. Anyway, the essence of what I said is uh, that remind yourself or train yourself to be careful about your language, that as much as possible it should be directly reporting the referent, first place. Secondly, the details of the referent or the realities of the referent. And third, if you want, you can interpret those realities. That's all. Got it?
Yes, sir.
You could hear all of that?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
I said reporting the details or describing the details of a referent, then reporting the total linkages or realities of a chosen referent, and then interpreting those realities. Okay? And finally, this you have, what I did to Mandra Rishika, you have to do it to you. And reading a book by yourself is perhaps the only opportunity. Or doing something in a session like this, where you can test it and you get a feedback. But primarily, you can do it with you. You should have a clear picture about your competencies. And you have to have a similar picture of the competencies of the other person or the requirements or the capacities. You have to interpret competency in a different situation. Or in a work situation, what are the critical variables in a work situation? So critical variables in a decision-making situation is like the critical competencies of your audience, I mean your trainee or your colleague. So you should build a network of your new perspective on the foundations of these critical points. So referent and referent. That is the foundation. Because referent is the universe. Referent is our world. Referent is everything, every item, every entity, every event, every phenomenon in this planet Earth. And definitely that is not that directly connected with us in our environment, in our operating environment, in our domain of existence. We come across referent only. Reality is reference only. So your attention should be on the reference, not on the descriptions of the reference. I had sent you a small parable about a horse. If you go by available descriptions about a wonderful horse, you may not identify a great horse. Anuratha made a very brilliant and creative analysis on that parable and sent me a report. It was beautiful, Anuratha.
Thank you, sir.
All right. So it is about seeing the entity rather than being influenced by the descriptions available about the entities. It's of a very high order. It is about all of you, I suppose, had a reading of that parable. I have a moment of wonder in which way you utilized or whether you opened that email or whether you read that parable. Did you? Yeah, all right.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And Whether you have understood or not, the extremely significant. It is about real referent perception, about referent reality perception. Because a duke who is so familiar with horses, because duke meaning rich, aristocratic kind of a feudal chief, so he must be using uh, uh, definitely horses. He must have been familiar with horses from childhood onwards, so he can easily understand a good horse by looking at it. His perception about a good horse was defined by the external appearances. Most of the time he could be right. See, very interesting, very interesting. But when he wanted the finest horse, an ordinary person, a vegetable vendor, a vegetable farmer, he identified the finest horse, and the Duke was almost irritated to see a mare-looking thing, a mare, not a real horse.
Really.
See? And when explained, he agreed, of course. So what is critical is what is critical. I hope you understood it. You have to go beyond the words of all kinds of descriptions and definitions and to look at the referent straight. This does not mean that you disregard the available explanations and definitions. No, let it be there, but be ready to be flexible enough to postpone that, especially in critical situations. And this is very important in the context of the you too, the genius himself. How will you recognize the greatness of you? How will you identify the expressions of the attendant spirit in you? If you are because you are the most familiar thing and entity and phenomenon in the whole world for you, and more the familiarity, more the rigid and disadvantage, whatever, very ordinary perceptions, familiar perceptions. If you look at you from the familiarity of available level and orbits or diagram of familiarity with you, how will you ever know when your entity is evolving? Because already you are all adults, having reached the ultimate by the social standards of qualification and role positions, and naturally the unconscious mind, which is trained to learn only the necessary things, will stop learning, will stop evolution. Had you continued the same velocity of development from 3 to 20, from 21 to 40, what would have been the level of you, my dear friends? There could be all kinds of logic that you have been working, you have been doing this, that, etc. No, 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 they are of course not important. I told you the maximum amount, the maximum load of work I have done when I was doing most critical things at XLRA and then at IIM Ahmedabad. And after that, I am really free, and it is so paradoxical and surprising that I have not done even 10%. Just imagine 10% of that work afterwards, after 1992. Because when you are driving the car, your vehicle at a higher speed, that is the time when you can cover a lot of distances, not when your driving season is over. Got it, Meenakshi? അമ്മേ അങ്ങനെയുണ്ട് കേൾക്കാവോ അമ്മയാ
Right, sir. Right.
I think there's a delay. But you can hear all that, right? Amaya? My question is, okay, despite the delay, can you hear all?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Clear, sir.
Yes,
Clear.
sir.
Go ahead, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right. Because you can hear both what I talk here as well as what, of course, if you have a divided attention. Now, so reference. We are going to nothing very special today. We are going to have a repeat look,
So
a
there's a
revisit.
problem again with your audio. There's again a problem with your audio.
Oh no. Let me see, let me use so-called what you I'm not that scared of what
Tintu is not muted, I see. Tintu.
Sorry?
Oh. Is it now? I have put a microphone. How is it? Sorry. Not this one. Okay. Now I have used the microphone now. How is it now? Is it clear?
Yes, yes.
All right.
Yes, sir. Clear.
So we will be making a so-called revision. Actually, a revision. Vision meaning to see. We will try to see today the so-called human self and its first component, the first spoke of the hub of the human self. When we discussed about genius in self, I mentioned that the self comprises the body, the mind, intelligence, intellect, and spirit. So self is a total name for that. There is no other so-called domain of self existing anywhere. This is the self. Or at least, if some of the so-called philosophers may disagree with me, they cannot disagree if I say self cannot be there without this. So these are the foundations of the self. And any variations, any impact, any injury, any damage to any one of this can definitely work on whatever you name as self. And to my understanding, the holistic awareness of this is what we should be meaning by self. So we are discussing or about revisiting the referent of this.
Yeah, Master, your entire voice is truncated. I can only hear bits and pieces.